My name is Alex. I'm 41 years old, and for the past 20 years I've been doing something that many would call shameful while others might find it tempting. I'm a paid companion, or if you prefer, an escort for ladies. Yes, specifically for ladies. Not for men, as people often assume in tales like this, but for wealthy, influential, mature women who need not just intimacy, but care, secrecy, and a chance to feel desirable. How did it all start? I was 21. I just moved to Berlin from a small provincial town in eastern Germany to enroll in university. I lived in a dorm, a tiny room with worn-out wallpaper, neighbors who always forgot about cleaning, and a constant shortage of money. I worked part-time as a waiter in a cafe in the business district, where ladies would gather in the evenings after work. They'd show up in elegant outfits, with styled hair, in heels, real career women who wanted to sip a cocktail, chat about deals, and at least briefly escape the role of iron ladies. On that night that turned my life upside down, a woman around 40 sat down next to me. Her name was Elizabeth, tall, well-groomed, with a tone that carried both exhaustion and authority. She ordered a daiquiri from me, then another, and after an hour she asked, "Are you a student here in Berlin?" "Yes," I replied. "Would you mind spending the weekend in Rome?" I smiled, thinking it was a joke, but she handed me a card. It had her mobile number and the name of a marketing firm where she held the position of director. The trip to Rome turned out to be anything but business. 2 days later, I was flying premium class on Lufthansa for the first time, dining with porcelain dishes, and looking at the lady who silently hinted she needed me. My debut. I won't lie, at that time I felt awkward. Anxiety, embarrassment, excitement. But once we were in the hotel on Via Veneto, the embarrassment vanished. Elizabeth was decisive, straightforward. She herself pulled off my sweater and said, "Relax, you're my escape." That's when I realized this wasn't a coincidence. It was a deal. I became part of her getaway, just like the suite with a view of the Colosseum or the sparkling wine in the chiller. And imagine, the next morning when she left a stack of bills on the bedside table, I didn't feel guilty. Instead, I realized I'd done a job and earned more than in a month at the cafe. How did it turn into a career? Back in Berlin, I was a changed man. I stayed a waiter, but now I saw ladies differently. I knew many of them had capital, that they were bored, that their husbands were stuck in offices or at symposia and they lacked adventures. A couple of weeks later, Elizabeth stopped by the cafe again, not alone, but with a friend, Sophia. She was around 50, with an infectious laugh that echoed through the room and a gaze that left no doubt. She craved entertainment, too. And I agreed again. That's how my path began. At first, sporadic dates, then regular clients. I discovered that in Berlin, there's a hidden network where ladies exchange contacts of companions. No one advertises it, but trust me, in elite circles of managers and socialites, it works better than any dating service. Finances. The most popular question, how much did you make? At the start, modestly. The first outing gave me €1,000. For a student, that was huge. But then the amounts grew. Ladies paid not just for intimacy, for time, for secrecy, for presence at events. It happened that in a week, I'd rack up as much as my classmates earned in 12 months. Of course, there were downsides to this. Double life. Leading this lifestyle isn't easy. By day, I was an ordinary student taking tests, hanging out in the reading room. By night, a partner to affluent ladies. Sometimes I'd show up at the dorm at 6:30 in the morning after a visit to apartments on Unter den Linden and rush to a psychology seminar. My buddies would tease, "Where do you disappear to?" And I'd brush it off. Part-time work. No one knew the truth. And what's the hardest part? Not the ethical dilemmas. The hardest is deceiving loved ones. When I started a relationship with a girlfriend, I couldn't explain where the new gadgets or travel money came from. I'd blame it on winning at cards or help from grandpa. That falsehood ate away at me. Initial lessons. Over 20 years, I've learned a few principles. Never cross the line. Don't get emotionally attached. Never gossip about a client with other ladies. Be ready for the day they let you go, without reasons. But at 21, I didn't know these norms. I was just gaining experience. And that's when I made a mistake that nearly ruined everything. First crack. Remember I mentioned Olivia, the girl from the literature faculty. With her, I first felt like I could be an ordinary guy, not just a product for others' pleasures. But with her, I realized the cost of deception. She started asking extra questions. Where did the sudden new clothes come from? Why could I afford a trip to Spain when my family isn't wealthy? Why were my gigs always described vaguely? I twisted my way out. First, I'd claim sports betting, then a buddy throwing me odd jobs at events. But one day, I returned to the dorm with the scent of elite perfume that I couldn't justify. Olivia figured it out. "Alex," she said, "you're seeing someone else right." I stayed silent, and that night I truly lost a close person for the first time. She left, and I was stuck in solitude, with finances, with clients, with the secret, but in solitude. After that, I became more cautious. I built a barrier between personal and professional. No relationships, just contracts, just norms. And incomes flowed more abundantly. I entered a private network. Ladies shared my number. Some called it a society, others a fellowship. Guys like me weren't formally listed there, but everyone knew we existed. In 2005, I first ended up in Tokyo. One of my clients, Isabella, took me on a business trip. She was the wife of a famous lawyer with her own design project. For her, I wasn't just a partner, I was an anti-stress. Someone she could relax with, not pretend to be unbreakable. We stayed in a suite in Shinjuku, dined at Sushi Show and French Laundry, and in the evenings, she'd ask me to just listen to her complaints about life. Sometimes it felt like I wasn't an escort but a consultant, just with a bed. But the more ladies appeared, the higher the risks. And one day, I got into a bind that could have turned into disaster. There was one client, Laura, young, attractive, around 30, wife of a politician. Dealing with her was like walking a minefield. She'd call me only under cover of darkness. We'd meet in modest apartments in MIT, and she'd repeat, "If my husband finds out, you're done." I thought she was exaggerating. But one day, leaving her place at dawn, I ran right into her husband, a big guy in a luxurious coat with a face from the news. He stared at me in a way that sent chills down my spine. I muttered something about wrong door and bolted, but I kept waiting for a knock on the dorm door or to be stopped on the sidewalk. That was the first time I understood. My occupation isn't just immoral, it can be fatally risky. Answers to queries. Have you ever felt ashamed? Yes, especially at the beginning. I spent a long time convincing myself that I was just providing a service, like a waiter serving drinks. But the reality is that shame would return sometimes, especially when looking in the mirror not at a charming young man, but at a person deceiving everyone. Have you ever fallen in love with a client? Once, and it was nightmare. She was a widow named Anna. She was 45, and with her I first felt something more than a transaction. But as soon as she sensed that I saw her not as a project, but as a person, she vanished. Just ignored calls. That's when I firmly learned, principle number one, don't fall in love. How much did you make in your peak years? It happened that in a month, I'd pull in more than my friends did in a year at offices, especially on trips. A week at an estate in Cannes could bring 5 to 6,000 euros, but with the incomes came fresh threats. The most astonishing thing in this saga isn't the intimacy. It's the secrets the ladies shared with me. I'd hear it all, from confessions about an abusive husband to stories of embezzling millions in tenders. Sometimes I'd think, if I recorded these conversations, I could ruin dozens of careers. But I always kept my mouth shut. Confidentiality was the only asset I had. But let's get back to my personal blunders. After the breakup with Olivia, I swore off romances with ordinary girls. But as usual, that's exactly when I met the one who breached my defenses. Her name was Mia. She worked as a reporter. We crossed paths at a party. I decided to keep the truth hidden. I said I was just a waiter, sometimes gigging at private events. We became a couple. For the first time in years, I felt normal. But the hidden side always catches up. One day, she found a bundle with 500 euros in cash in my pocket. I claimed it was tips from a customer at the cafe. She gave me a long look and said nothing, but a week later a text came. I'm not ready for this. And again, I was isolated. By then I clearly understood. This life is incompatible with normal bonds. I reinforced the barrier, letting no one close. I became what ladies praised as the ideal partner, attentive, taciturn, always ready to listen. But deep down, I knew it was a mask. The real me was hidden. But even barriers fall. In my biography, there was an episode when I got too close to the edge, and everything nearly ended in a scandal that could have erased me for good. I always reminded myself, don't get attached, don't let them in, don't allow too much closeness. But one day I broke all 3 commandments. Her name was Natalie. 38 years old, a successful owner of an art salon in Berlin with a financier husband who was rarely home. She was different from the others, balanced, educated, without the nervousness and drama I often saw in clients. She just existed in her space of creativity and isolation. We met at a private soiree in Kreuzberg. She approached me herself, though she knew who I was. In her eyes, there was no guilt, no hidden thrill, just curiosity. A week later, I was already at her country residence near Munich, and a month later, I realized that for the first time in years, I wanted to stay. Not leave after the session, but stay. Natalie paid like the others, but soon it stopped feeling like work. She'd call in the middle of the night because she was lonely. We'd breakfast together, discuss movies. For the first time in ages, I felt like a person again, not a commodity. One day, she slipped. You know, if it weren't for my husband, I'd keep you for myself. I laughed, but inside, everything flipped. I realized I was bought not with currency, but with emotions. And that's when everything spiraled. Natalie's husband suspected something. I still don't know. Maybe neighbors blabbed or he noticed changes in her. But one evening, as I was leaving her place, 2 burly guys intercepted me. They didn't fight, just grabbed my elbows, led me around the corner, and warned. Alex, forget about this lady. Show up again, you'll regret it. I realized it wasn't a bluff. For people like that, promises weigh more than bullets. I went back home and for the first time in years felt terror. Real, instinctual. I grasped that my activity was no longer a game. It's not just profit, it's a threat to health or existence. Natalie called, sent messages, begged to meet. I ignored her. A month later, she vanished from my reality as suddenly as she appeared. And again, I was alone, but now with the understanding, getting too close is deadly. Why didn't you quit after that? Great question. I've asked myself that countless times. The answer is simple: capital and habit. When you've been swimming in luxury for years, viewing the world from premium lounges and apartments, going back to a cafe or office for 1,500 euros a month is almost impossible. It's an addiction. Have you ever regretted the choice? Every time I lost someone important, Olivia, Mia, Natalie, I could have built a standard life, but I chose incomes. Did you have clients who really messed with your nerves? There were ladies who didn't need a partner. They needed an object to dominate, and that was the toughest phase in my biography. After the incident with Natalie, I became extremely vigilant. No more romantic illusions. But with that, I started taking on more extravagant offers. Some ladies wanted not closeness, they wanted domination. There was one in Paris, Greta. Over 50, she ran a solid IT corporation. Her home resembled a fortress. Everything there was impeccable, cool. She wasn't seeking tenderness. She sought submission. I'd arrive and become a role. Sometimes a silent guard, sometimes a subordinate. I won't delve into details, but after some sessions with her, I'd leave in complete emotional exhaustion. That's when I first realized that this occupation was destroying me internally. In one moment, I sat down and honestly asked myself, do you want this until old age? To be a ghost, a secret in others' stories? I had no answer. I had everything my peers dreamed of: money, travels, luxury items. But I lacked the main thing, myself. That's exactly when a situation happened that flipped my view on everything. One client crossed the line. Her game nearly turned into trouble for me. After the episode with Natalie, I became super cautious. But a couple of years later, a lady appeared in my life who put everything at stake. Her name was Erica. She lived in Dubai, owned a chain of luxury boutiques, and was on the Forbes Women in Power list. On the surface, the perfect client, affluent, authoritative, neat. But she was cunning and masterfully manipulated weaknesses. We met at a philanthropic dinner in Berlin. She immediately spotted me among the guests, a gaze full of attention and light mockery, as if she already knew everything about me. "Alex," she said, approaching, "I need someone. Unique, not just a companion, someone who knows how to be invisible and yet indispensable." I thought it was a standard intrigue, but soon I grasped that she meant it literally. Erica set up a series of tests. She'd invite me to elite parties where guests saw me as part of the decor. She tested my endurance, resilience, and worst of all, loyalty. One evening, we were on a boat in Saint-Tropez among strangers. Erica led conversations with them, juggled, and I stayed nearby. And suddenly I noticed one guest, a guy in a chic suit, was studying me too intently. Later, it turned out he was a detective. Erica wasn't testing me, someone else was inspecting me. Someone who wanted to confirm my silence. At the next rendezvous, Erica stated directly, "Alex, if you betray me, blame yourself." I felt my heart stop. This was real danger. And that's when I understood I'd wandered too deep. 20 years of games, 20 years of falsehood, and now the stakes are real. My daily life became an eternal balance between threat and the pull to preserve what attracted me to this role. Independence, chic, the ability to be useful. Was it scary? Yes, with Erica, for the first time, I truly feared for my existence. Not abstractly, but specifically. Every contact, every notification, every outing could end badly. Why didn't you bail? Incomes, routine, and honestly, adrenaline. This life is like a dose. You view the world through windows of elite apartments, salons, and private jets. Returning to normalcy after that is hard. Have you ever regretted starting? Yes, every loss. Olivia, Mia, Natalie. Every night when I realized I couldn't be authentic, but it gave knowledge that no university provides. One day, Erica invited me to her suite in Dubai. It was the climax of her exams. She spoke evenly, almost warmly, but her tone carried a challenge. Alex, I want to see what you do for me. That's when I realized she wanted me to cross ethical boundaries. I hesitated. Every nerve screamed no, but the professional part, used to risks, pushed yes. That was the moment when I seriously thought for the first time that I could lose everything. Existence, dignity, principles. I left, didn't give in to her intrigue. We parted abruptly. Erica never bothered me again. That was the first time in 20 years I rejected a client. Since then, I've grasped a few things. Money isn't worth your existence, and mental balance. Any connections in this field are a dance on the edge. Independence is the most valuable currency. Now I'm 41. I continue serving ladies, but much more cautiously. No more romance, no adventures with power. I've mastered refusal, and that's the most important. Sometimes I recall the girls I lost. Sometimes the ladies from Rome, Tokyo, Berlin, Dubai. Sometimes about who I've become. And you know, this saga isn't about passion or currency. It's about boundaries, decisions, and how sometimes the price of a luxurious life is your own independence. Would you do it again? Now, no, at 20, maybe. The experience was useful but too costly. Have you ever shared with friends? No, never. Even the closest are in the dark. What do you advise those thinking about something similar? Think about boundaries, about ethics, about consequences. Money comes and goes, but existence and inner peace are priceless. If you want details, how it looked from the inside, travels, soirees, the most unusual requests, ask in the comments. I can describe how 20 years on the edge of luxury looks through the eyes of someone who lived it firsthand. But one thing for sure, even 20 years of experience don't strengthen you when you face a genuine threat.